In downtown Seattle, a 67-year-old retired fraud investigator was about to uncover a deadly conspiracy. What started as a routine doctor's visit took a shocking turn when her Uber driver whispered a chilling warning. Veronica Brown wasn't your typical passenger. For 40 years, she had investigated insurance fraud, known for exposing corruption that cost companies millions. When Carlos warned, "They're following you," she had no idea they were walking into systematic murder disguised as healthcare policy. Veronica's decision to trust him and fight back would expose international genocide targeting elderly populations. What began as suspicious claim denials became revelation of algorithmic elimination programs. Healthcare would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the medical building's windows as Veronica Brown waited for the elevator, Dr. Martinez's words still echoing in her mind. Irregular rhythm. We'll need to monitor this closely. At 67, she'd expected her body to start betraying her, but hearing it spoken aloud in clinical terms made it feel more real, more final. The elevator's brass doors reflected a woman she barely recognized. Silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, sensible shoes, the kind of navy blazer that screamed, "retired office worker." When had she become so invisible? During her 40 years investigating insurance claims, people noticed Veronica Brown. They respected her methodical approach, her ability to uncover fraud that others missed. Now she was just another elderly woman with a heart condition, shuffling through downtown Seattle on a Tuesday afternoon. Her phone buzzed. The Uber was 2 minutes away. Outside, the October drizzle painted the streets in shades of gray. Veronica pulled her coat tighter as she spotted the silver Honda Civic with the rideshare decal. The driver, a Hispanic man in his 40s with tired eyes, stepped out to open her door. "Mrs. Brown?" "Yes, thank you." She settled into the back seat, noting his small courtesies. In her experience, people revealed themselves in the details. This man helped an elderly passenger with her seatbelt without making her feel helpless. Former military, maybe, or law enforcement. "How was your appointment?" Carlos Vega asked, pulling into traffic. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned when to ask questions and when to stay quiet. Routine. She studied his reflection in the rearview mirror. Alert eyes that swept the road constantly. Defensive driving habits that suggested professional training. "You're very observant, Mr. Vega." His eyes met hers briefly in the mirror. Occupational hazard. Former police detective. "I thought so. 23 years investigating insurance fraud teaches you to read people." She adjusted her purse, feeling the weight of her final case files inside. Even in retirement, she couldn't bring herself to throw them away. Some cases never truly close in an investigator's mind. Carlos navigated the downtown traffic with practiced ease, but Veronica noticed his frequent glances at the mirrors. Not the casual checks of a good driver, the systematic scanning of someone watching for trouble. "Everything all right?" she asked. His jaw tightened slightly. "Probably nothing. Black sedan's been behind us since I picked you up. Could be coincidence." Veronica's pulse quickened, and she fought the urge to turn around. 40 years of investigating had taught her that coincidences were rare. What kind of sedan? Late model BMW. Tinted windows. Staying exactly 3 cars back, Carlos changed lanes smoothly. The sedan changed lanes too. That's not normal traffic behavior. A chill ran down Veronica's spine that had nothing to do with the Seattle weather. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd noticed things. Phone calls that hung up when she answered. Her mailbox rifled through, letters scattered on the ground. The feeling of being watched at Safeway, that prickling sensation between her shoulder blades when she bent over the frozen food section. She'd dismissed it all as paranoia. What would anyone want with a retired claims investigator? But now, sitting in this stranger's car with his calm, professional voice confirming her worst fears, the pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. "Mr. Vega," she said quietly. "I think we need to talk." He caught her tone immediately. "What kind of cases did you work?" "The kind that cost companies millions when I proved fraud." Her mind raced through her final investigation. The pattern of denied claims, the suspicious deaths, the paper trail that led to places powerful people didn't want exposed. The kind some people would rather stay buried. Carlos made a sudden right turn onto Pine Street. The sedan hesitated for just a moment before following. "We've got a problem, Mrs. Brown." "Veronica." "And yes, we do." She gripped her purse tighter, feeling the manila folders inside. Somewhere in those files was evidence that could destroy reputations, end careers, maybe even put people in prison. She'd been methodical, as always. Too methodical. "I can lose them in the International District," Carlos said. "Lots of narrow streets, good places to—" "No." Veronica's voice carried the authority of someone used to making hard decisions. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with first. Can you tell if they're armed?" Carlos's eyebrows rose. Most elderly passengers would be demanding he call the police or drive to the nearest station. Instead, she was asking tactical questions. "Can't tell from here." "But professional tail job like this?" "Yeah, they're armed." The sedan had closed to 2 cars back now. In the fading daylight, Veronica couldn't make out faces through the tinted glass, but she could feel their attention like a physical weight. "There's a threatening call I got last week," she admitted. Man's voice, very calm, said I should enjoy my retirement while I could. I thought it was a prank. "What did you investigate that would make someone this nervous?" Veronica's mind flashed to her final case file. Medicare claims for elderly patients. All denied or delayed. All patients who subsequently died. All connected to a network of doctors, insurance companies, and pharmaceutical firms that created a perfect storm of neglect and greed. Medical insurance fraud. Systematic denial of claims for elderly patients. Her voice hardened. People died because their treatments were delayed or denied entirely. The fraud went deep. Deeper than anyone wanted to admit. Carlos took another turn, watching the mirrors. "And you documented everything." "Everything!" Names, dates, financial connections, death certificates. 40 years of investigation taught me to build airtight cases. She paused. Maybe too airtight. The sedan was directly behind them now, no longer pretending to be casual traffic. In the growing darkness, its headlights felt like hostile eyes. "Mrs. Veronica," Carlos said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "listen carefully. These people aren't trying to scare you. They're following you to confirm your patterns, your routines. This is reconnaissance for something worse." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen it before. During my time on the force, I worked cases involving people who knew too much about the wrong things." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The ones who ended up in accidents or suicides all had the same kind of tale in the days before. Veronica felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the sharp clarity that came with danger. Her retirement fog lifted, replaced by the analytical mind that had made her one of the best fraud investigators in the Pacific Northwest. "Mr. Vega, Carlos, I need you to know something. If they're willing to kill to protect this secret, then what I uncovered is bigger than insurance fraud. It's systematic murder of vulnerable people for profit." Carlos met her eyes in the mirror. "Then we need to keep you alive long enough to prove it." The sedan accelerated, closing the final gap between them. Through her rear window, Veronica could now see 2 figures in the front seats. The passenger was talking into a phone. "They're calling for backup," she said calmly. "We're about to have company." Carlos's response was immediate and professional. "Hold on." He yanked the wheel hard left, tires screaming as they took the corner onto First Avenue. The sedan, caught off guard, slid wide and had to brake hard to make the turn. "There," Carlos pointed ahead. "Pike Place Market. Lots of people, lots of exits. Good place to disappear if you know the layout." "I know it," Veronica said. She'd been shopping there for 40 years. As they pulled into the market's parking area, the black sedan rounded the corner behind them, its engine roaring as it accelerated to close the gap. Veronica Brown, retired insurance investigator, felt her heart pounding, with more than just her medical condition. For the first time in months, she felt truly alive. "Carlos," she said as they prepared to abandon the car, "I hope you're ready for this, because I don't think they're planning to let either of us walk away." Carlos's hand moved to the door handle as the sedan's headlights swept across the market's entrance. "Stay low. When I say move, we go fast toward the main building. Don't look back." Veronica felt her investigative instincts sharpen to a razor's edge. The fog of retirement that had clouded her mind for months burned away completely. "How many exits does the market have at this hour? You're thinking like a cop." Carlos's approval was evident even in his tense whisper. 3 main exits, plus the loading docks. But they'll have people watching by now. The black sedan pulled into the lot, moving slowly like a predator stalking wounded prey. Veronica watched its methodical approach and felt a familiar cold calculation settle over her thoughts. During her decades investigating fraud, she'd learned to think like the criminals she pursued. Now she had to think like the targets. "They don't know what I look like up close," she realized. "They've been following me, but surveillance photos and direct contact are different things." Carlos shot her a sharp look. "What are you thinking?" "That they're making assumptions about a 67-year-old woman. Assumptions that might get them killed instead of us." She opened her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder, a habit from her investigation days. "First, I need you to know what we're really dealing with." The sedan had stopped 50 yards away, its occupants apparently conferring. Carlos used the respite to study his passenger more carefully. The helpless elderly woman from the medical building was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes held the cold focus of a professional hunter. "Talk fast," he said. "Meridian Insurance Group. Ever heard of them?" Veronica's voice carried the clipped efficiency of someone building a case. "They've been systematically targeting elderly claimants for the past 3 years, using actuarial algorithms to identify people most likely to die before they can appeal denied claims." Carlos felt ice form in his stomach. Jesus Christ. Harold Martinez, 73, lung cancer. Denied coverage for experimental treatment, died 6 weeks later. Margaret Chen, 81, heart surgery. Claim delayed for 4 months of appeals, died waiting. Robert Stevens, 69, diabetes complications. Coverage dropped entirely, died in the emergency room because he couldn't afford insulin. Her voice remained steady, but Carlos could hear the fury underneath. 47 cases in my final investigation. 47 people who died while Meridian's executives collected bonuses for keeping claim payouts low. The sedan's doors opened. 2 men in dark suits emerged, moving with the casual confidence of people who'd done this before. "You documented all of this?" Carlos asked, his cop instincts automatically cataloging escape routes and potential weapons. "Everything. Financial records, internal emails, death certificates, family testimonies." She gripped her purse tighter. "Including communications between Meridian executives and certain politicians about healthcare policy changes that would make their practices completely legal." Carlos understood now why someone would want Veronica Brown dead. This wasn't just insurance fraud. It was a systematic program of killing vulnerable people for profit, with political protection. "The men approaching us," he said quietly, "they're not street criminals, military-bearing, coordinated movement. These are professionals. Former military turned corporate security." Veronica had spent enough time investigating to recognize the type. The kind who tell themselves they're just following orders while they eliminate problems for their employers. The 2 men were 30 yards away now, trying to look casual, while clearly scanning for their target. One spoke into an earpiece, coordinating with backup that was probably already moving into position. "Veronica," Carlos said, "I need you to understand something. I left the police force because I tried to expose corruption, and my partner died for it. I've been running from that guilt for 2 years, driving strangers around Seattle because I was too broken to do the job I was born for. He met her eyes in the rearview mirror. But this, what you're describing, this is exactly the kind of evil I became a cop to fight. She saw something shift in his posture, his whole demeanor changing from defeated ex-cop to the detective he'd been trained to be. Carlos, these people have killed 47 elderly patients. They won't hesitate to kill 2 more people to cover it up. Then we better make sure we're not as easy to kill as they think. He pulled out his cell phone, fingers moving quickly across the screen. I'm texting an old contact. Someone who might be able to help if we survive the next hour. The men were 20 yards away. Veronica could see them clearly now. Late 30s, athletic builds. The kind of bland professional appearance that made them invisible in corporate settings. The taller one had his hand inside his jacket. They're armed, she observed calmly. Of course they are. Carlos pocketed his phone and turned to face her fully. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get out first and draw their attention. You stay low and move toward the market's main entrance. There are security cameras there, and they won't want witnesses. Absolutely not. Veronica's voice carried 40 years of authority. I'm not letting another person die because of my investigation. Ma'am, with all due respect. Don't, ma'am. Me, Detective Vega. I've been in dangerous situations before. The difference is, I know what these people are capable of, and you don't. She checked her watch. It's 6:47 p.m. Market closes at 7, but the fishmongers stay later for cleanup. We use the crowd as cover to reach the back exits, then lose them in Post Alley. Carlos realized he was looking at someone who'd spent decades thinking tactically about adversarial situations. You've done this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. 3 years ago, I was investigating a medical equipment fraud case. The company's security team followed me for 2 weeks, trying to intimidate me into dropping the investigation. Her smile was sharp as winter steel. They underestimated me too. The approaching men were 15 yards away, close enough that Veronica could see the earpieces they wore. Professional-grade equipment, which confirmed her assessment of their training and backing. What happened to the security team? Carlos asked. 2 are in federal prison. 1 died in what was officially ruled a suicide but was probably elimination by his employers when he became a liability. She opened her car door slowly, keeping her movements calm and elderly. I learned that when you're fighting people without consciences, you have to be smarter, not stronger. Carlos watched her transform again, her posture shifting back to that of a frail elderly woman struggling with her car door. The tactical professional disappeared, replaced by someone any casual observer would dismiss as harmless. Stay close, she whispered. And remember, they think they're hunting a helpless old woman and a burned-out ex-cop. Let's show them what happens when their assumptions are wrong. They emerged from the car together, Veronica leaning slightly on Carlos's arm as if she needed support. To anyone watching, they looked like a granddaughter and her driver, moving slowly toward the market entrance. The 2 men adjusted their approach, splitting up to flank them, while maintaining the pretense of being casual shoppers. But Veronica noted the details that marked them as hunters. The way they avoided looking directly at their targets while keeping them in peripheral vision, the coordinated timing of their movements, the subtle hand signals they used to communicate. Earpiece on the left is coordinating with someone, she murmured to Carlos. At least 4 people involved, probably 6. How can you tell? Pattern recognition. Same skills I used to track financial fraud networks. They were approaching the market's main entrance now, where the familiar chaos of Pike Place provided blessed cover. Carlos, I need you to know something. If we get separated, don't try to find me. Get to the police and tell them about Detective Sarah Kim. Sarah Kim? Carlos stopped walking so abruptly that Veronica had to catch herself. You know her. She's my former partner. His voice was tight with old pain and newer hope. The one I thought died because of my investigation into police corruption. Veronica felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The same sensation she'd experienced when solving complex fraud cases. Carlos, I don't think your partner's death was coincidence. And I don't think Sarah Kim being involved in this case is coincidence either. The man with the earpiece was speaking urgently into his microphone. his casual pretense dropping as he realized his targets were entering the crowded market. In a few seconds, they'd lose the clean shot they'd been hoping for. "Move," Carlos said, his cop instincts taking over completely. "Fast as you can without running. They're about to escalate." But Veronica was already in motion, her elderly shuffle transforming into the brisk, purposeful walk of someone who knew exactly where she was going and why. Behind them, she heard the subtle increase in urgency as their pursuers realized their easy target was anything but easy. "Carlos," she said as they plunged into the market's controlled chaos, "I think we're about to discover that everything we thought we knew about this situation is wrong. And I think that might be the only thing that keeps us alive." The familiar chaos of Pike Place Market enveloped them like a protective shroud. Vendors, calling out prices, tourists, snapping photos, the sharp scent of fish, and the earthier smell of fresh produce mixing in the evening air. Veronica moved through it with the confidence of someone who'd shopped these stalls for decades, but her eyes constantly swept for threats and exits. "This way," she murmured to Carlos, guiding him toward the far end where the smaller medical practices clustered in the renovated buildings beyond the main market. "There's someone who might help us understand what we're really dealing with." Behind them, she caught glimpses of their pursuers trying to navigate the crowd without looking obvious. The professional hunters had become clumsy in this environment, their tactical training designed for controlled situations, not the organic chaos of a public market at closing time. Carlos kept pace beside her, his hand hovering near the small of his back in a gesture that told Veronica he was armed. "You said Detective Kim is your former partner?" "Sarah Kim, best detective I ever worked with." His voice carried old pain. "Also the one I got killed when I tried to expose the corruption in our precinct." "What if she's not dead?" Carlos nearly stumbled. "What do you mean?" Veronica's investigative mind was connecting patterns at high speed. "The threatening phone call I received mentioned that I should be careful about who I trusted in law enforcement. What if your corruption investigation and my insurance fraud case are connected? What if Sarah Kim discovered the same network I did?" They reached the edge of the market proper, where the crowds thinned and the evening shadows grew longer. Veronica led them down a narrow side street lined with small businesses, a bookstore, a coffee roastery, and tucked between them, a modest sign reading Dr. Rebecca Torres, Family Medicine. "She's the physician whose patient files led me to the bigger pattern," Veronica explained as they approached the clinic's entrance. "Elderly patients whose legitimate insurance claims were being systematically denied or delayed." The clinic's windows were dark, but Veronica could see a light in the back office. She pressed the after-hours buzzer, her finger firm and insistent. A voice crackled through the intercom, tense and wary. "We're closed." "Dr. Torres, it's Veronica Brown, the insurance investigator. I need to speak with you about your patients who died after claim denials." Silence stretched long enough that Carlos began scanning the street for their pursuers. Then the door's electronic lock buzzed open. Dr. Rebecca Torres stood in the narrow hallway, her dark hair pulled back, wearing scrubs that suggested she'd been working late. At 45, she had the kind of tired eyes that spoke of too many battles fought and too many lost. But when she recognized Veronica, her expression shifted from wariness to something approaching relief. "Mrs. Brown, I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." She gestured them inside quickly, locking the door behind them. "When you stopped returning my calls, I thought—" Her gaze fell on Carlos. "Who's this?" "Carlos Vega, former Seattle PD detective. We're being followed by people who want to kill us to keep the insurance fraud quiet." Dr. Torres's face went pale. "They found you. You knew this would happen?" Veronica's investigative instincts sharpened. "Doctor, what exactly did you tell me during our interviews?" Dr. Torres led them through the waiting room toward her office, her movements quick and nervous. "I told you about my patients who died after their claims were denied. What I didn't tell you was that I'd been documenting everything for months before you contacted me. I knew someone was systematically targeting my elderly patients." Carlos positioned himself where he could watch both the front entrance and the rear exit. "How many people have died?" "In my practice alone, 17 patients in the past year." All elderly, all with legitimate claims that were denied or delayed until they died. Dr. Torres's voice carried the weight of professional guilt. Harold Martinez was my patient for 12 years. When Meridian denied his lung cancer treatment, I tried to appeal directly. The response came from a Victoria Blackstone, claiming his case didn't meet their new actuarial standards for treatment approval. Veronica felt another piece click into place. Victoria Blackstone, CEO of Meridian Insurance Group. You know her? I know her company's methods. But I'm beginning to think this goes deeper than corporate greed. Veronica opened her purse and pulled out a thick manila folder. Doctor, I need you to look at something. She spread papers across Dr. Torres's desk, claim denials, death certificates, financial records that painted a picture of systematic elimination of vulnerable patients. But now, looking at them in the context of professional assassination attempts, they revealed a more sinister pattern. Look at the timing. Veronica pointed to a series of dates. Claims denied, appeals filed, patients die, and then, she indicated a column of numbers. Insurance payouts to beneficiaries are delayed or reduced through legal challenges. Dr. Torres studied the documents, her medical training allowing her to see patterns that others might miss. These aren't just denied claims. This is a deliberate program to eliminate people whose healthcare costs exceed their actuarial value. Carlos moved away from the window. We've got company. 2 men across the street, trying to look casual. They found us. Dr. Torres's hands were shaking as she continued reading Veronica's files. Mrs. Brown, this document here, it shows that Meridian has been sharing patient data with a company called Actuarial Solutions, Inc. They're using predictive algorithms to identify elderly patients most likely to die within specific timeframes. And then ensuring those predictions come true by denying their medical care. Veronica finished grimly. There's more. Dr. Torres pulled out her own files from a locked cabinet. I've been tracking similar patterns in other practices around Seattle. Dr. Jennifer Walsh in Ballard, Dr. Michael Chen in Georgetown, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez in West Seattle. All of them have reported unusual numbers of elderly patient deaths following insurance claim denials. Carlos checked his phone. Still no response from my contact, but we can't stay here. They'll find a way in soon. Veronica was studying Dr. Torres's additional files when something caught her attention. Doctor, look at this pattern. The patients who died weren't random elderly people. They were all receiving Social Security benefits above a certain threshold, or they had substantial savings accounts, or they owned property in gentrifying neighborhoods. Jesus, Dr. Torres breathed. They're not just eliminating expensive patients. They're targeting elderly people with assets that can be seized through legal proceedings when they die without proper medical care. The implications hit all 3 of them simultaneously. This wasn't healthcare fraud. It was systematic murder for profit on an industrial scale, disguised as actuarial efficiency. Dr. Torres, Veronica said urgently, do you have copies of all this documentation? Digital copies, encrypted, stored off-site. She was already moving, pulling hard drives and USB devices from various hiding places around her office. I learned early on that physical files have a way of disappearing when powerful people want them gone. Carlos's phone buzzed. He answered immediately. Vega. His expression shifted as he listened. Sarah? Sarah, is that really you? Veronica watched his face transform from disbelief to hope to growing alarm. What do you mean you've been investigating this for 2 years? What happened that night at the precinct? Dr. Torres had finished gathering her files and was stuffing them into a medical bag. We need to leave, now. I can see more people positioning themselves around the building. But Carlos was still on the phone, his conversation growing more intense. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. I'm with Veronica Brown, the insurance investigator, and Dr. Torres. We have proof of systematic murder disguised as insurance fraud. How deep does this go? He listened for a long moment, his expression growing darker. When he hung up, he turned to them with the kind of expression that meant their situation had just become much worse. Sarah's been undercover for 2 years, investigating what she calls actuarial murder. The corruption in our precinct wasn't about drugs or money. It was about covering up a network of insurance companies, medical practices, and legal firms that are systematically killing elderly people for their assets. Dr. Torres slung her bag over her shoulder. How many people are involved? Dozens. Maybe hundreds. And they have people in the police department, the medical examiner's office, and the courts. Carlos moved to the rear exit. Sarah says we need to get to a safe location immediately. She's been building a case, but she needs our evidence to make it stick. Veronica felt the weight of 40 years of investigation experience settling on her shoulders. Carlos, ask yourself this. If Sarah's been undercover for 2 years building a case against this network, how did she know to call you tonight? How did she know we'd need help? The question hung in the air as the lights went out in the clinic, plunging them into darkness. Outside, they could hear the sound of vehicles arriving, doors slamming, and the coordinated movement of people who had done this many times before. Move, Carlos whispered. Back exit, now. But as they reached the rear door, Veronica grabbed his arm. Carlos, what if this isn't a rescue? What if we're walking into exactly what they want us to do? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Carlos's hand froze on the door handle. Outside, they could hear footsteps moving around the building's perimeter. Systematic, coordinated, professional. You think Sarah's compromised? I think a detective who's been dead for 2 years suddenly calling you tonight is too convenient. Veronica's analytical mind was working at full speed. Either she's been undercover this whole time and never contacted you, which means she's been letting you suffer with guilt unnecessarily, or she's working for them and this is a trap. Carlos stepped back from the door, his cop instincts screaming warnings he'd been too emotionally compromised to hear. Shit. We need another way out. Dr. Torres was checking her phone, the screen's glow illuminating her worried face. There's a service tunnel that connects to the building next door. It was part of the original construction when this whole block was renovated. Medical emergency access. The sound of someone testing the front door lock echoed through the clinic. Then came the subtle electronic chirp of a security system being professionally bypassed. They're inside, Carlos whispered. He drew his service weapon, a Glock 19 he'd kept from his police days. Doctor, that tunnel. Where's the access? Storage room. Behind the drug cabinet. Dr. Torres was already moving, her medical bag clutched tightly. But it's narrow. We'll have to crawl. Veronica followed, her mind racing through possibilities. Carlos, your phone. Did you tell Sarah where we were? His expression went cold as the implication hit him. I mentioned Dr. Torres by name. Then they knew exactly where to find us. She helped Dr. Torres move aside a heavy metal cabinet, revealing a maintenance hatch in the wall. Someone's been playing us from the beginning. The sound of systematic searching came from the front of the clinic. Drawers being opened, files rifled through. The methodical work of professionals who knew what they were looking for. Dr. Torres opened the hatch, revealing a dark tunnel barely wide enough for one person. It leads to the basement of the building next door. From there, we can reach the parking garage. Ladies first. Carlos positioned himself to cover their retreat. I'll hold them off until you're through. Absolutely not. Veronica's voice carried absolute authority. We all go, or no one goes. I didn't survive 40 years of investigating corruption by abandoning allies. A new sound reached them. Quiet conversation from the clinic's main room. Veronica recognized the cadence, if not the words. Professional briefing. Someone giving orders. Dr. Torres had already crawled into the tunnel. Her voice echoed back, hollow and urgent. They're talking about searching the building systematically. Something about not leaving any evidence behind. Carlos helped Veronica into the tunnel, noting how she moved with surprising agility for someone her age. The investigative work had kept her in better shape than most people assumed. The tunnel was cramped and dusty, clearly not designed for regular human passage. Emergency lighting strips provided minimal illumination, creating a claustrophobic passage that felt more like a coffin than an escape route. Behind them, the sounds of searching grew more urgent. Then came a voice that made Carlos freeze completely. Vega's phone GPS shows he was here 20 minutes ago. Find them. The voice was familiar. Not Sarah Kim, but Detective Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Carlos's former supervisor, and the man he'd suspected of covering up the corruption that led to Sarah's supposed death. "Carlos," Veronica whispered from ahead in the tunnel. "What is it?" "Webb, my former lieutenant, the one I thought was dirty." His mind raced through implications. If Webb's here, then this isn't just corporate security. This is official police business. Or police corruption, Veronica corrected, which means we can't trust anyone in law enforcement. They reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into the basement of an adjacent building. Dr. Torres helped pull them through, then immediately began sealing the hatch behind them. "This building has security cameras," she warned, "but it also has multiple exits. We can reach the street through the delivery entrance." Veronica was studying her surroundings with the same methodical attention she'd applied to fraud investigations. "Dr. Torres, how did you know about this tunnel?" "I didn't until tonight. A colleague mentioned it during our conversation about safe evacuation procedures." She paused, looking uncertain. "Dr. Jennifer Walsh. She said she'd needed to use unconventional exits from her own clinic recently." Carlos and Veronica exchanged glances. Too many coincidences. Too many people who happened to know exactly what they needed when they needed it. "Doctor?" Veronica said carefully. "When exactly did Dr. Walsh tell you about this tunnel?" "This afternoon. She called right after you contacted me about meeting tonight." Dr. Torres's expression shifted as she realized the implication. "You think she was. I think we've been guided here deliberately." Veronica felt the familiar cold certainty that came when a complex fraud scheme finally revealed its true structure. Someone wanted us in this specific location, at this specific time. Carlos was already moving toward what he hoped was the exit. "Then we need to get out of here before we walk into whatever they have planned next." But as they reached the basement's main door, they could hear voices outside. Multiple people, positioning themselves around the building. The professional, coordinated movement of people who had done this many times before. "How many buildings do they have surrounded?" Dr. Torres asked. Carlos peered through a basement window, counting figures in the darkness outside. "At least 6 people that I can see. Probably more." Veronica was studying the basement layout when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. "Carlos, look at this." She was pointing to a workstation in the corner. Computer equipment, monitoring devices, and what looked like building schematics. But it was the photographs tacked to a bulletin board that told the real story. Pictures of elderly people. Dozens of them. All with red X marks drawn across their faces. This isn't a random basement, she realized. This is a command center. Dr. Torres moved closer to the workstation, her medical training allowing her to interpret what she was seeing. These are patient files. Medical records for elderly people with high-value insurance policies. She pulled out several folders. Harold Martinez, Margaret Chen, Robert Stevens. All your investigated cases, Mrs. Brown. Carlos found a laptop that was still running, its screen showing a complex database. Jesus Christ, they've been tracking every elderly person in Seattle with significant assets or insurance coverage. Cross-referencing medical conditions, life expectancy, and property values. The scope of what they were seeing was staggering. This wasn't just insurance fraud. It was industrial-scale murder disguised as actuarial efficiency, with a technological infrastructure that suggested years of planning and substantial financial backing. Look at this. Dr. Torres had found another file cabinet. Legal documents. Wills, property transfers, insurance beneficiary changes. All for people who died after their medical claims were denied. Veronica felt pieces clicking together in her mind. They're not just killing people for insurance money. They're manipulating inheritance laws to seize property in gentrifying neighborhoods. The insurance fraud is just one piece of a larger asset seizure operation. Carlos discovered a communication log on the computer. Encrypted messages between someone called actuarial and someone called oversight. Recent exchanges about Package V and Package C, that's us. They've been tracking our movements all day. Then they know we're here, Dr. Torres said. They wanted us here, Veronica corrected. This whole thing. The car chase, the market, your clinic, this tunnel. We've been herded like sheep toward a slaughter. The sound of footsteps on the stairs above them confirmed her analysis. They were trapped in a basement that had been prepared specifically for this purpose, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy so vast that their individual deaths would barely register as statistics. There. Carlos pointed to a heavy steel door marked Utility Access. Steam tunnels. They connect to the city's underground infrastructure. But as they moved toward their last possible escape route, the lights went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, they could hear the systematic sound of people taking positions throughout the building above them. Carlos, Veronica whispered in the darkness, I think we're about to discover whether 40 years of investigating fraud taught me enough about survival to keep us alive through the next hour. The steel door opened with a metallic groan, revealing a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. Behind them, footsteps descended the stairs with the measured pace of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. The steam tunnels beneath Seattle stretched like arteries through the city's underground skeleton, carrying the heated breath of a metropolis that never truly slept. Veronica led the way through the narrow passage, her investigative experience translating surprisingly well to navigating confined spaces under pressure. The thermal pipes provided enough residual heat to keep the tunnels from being completely frigid, but the dampness seeped through their clothes with persistent fingers. These tunnels connect to the county courthouse, she whispered to Carlos, who was helping Dr. Torres navigate the uneven floor behind them. I spent enough time there during fraud cases to learn the building's layout. There is a maintenance exit that leads to 3rd Avenue. Carlos checked his phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Still no signal in the underground maze. How far? Maybe half a mile. But Carlos... She paused, listening to the echo of their footsteps. We need to talk about Sarah Kim before we surface. The mention of his former partner's name made Carlos's jaw tighten. What about her? You said she was investigating this network for 2 years. But if she's been undercover that long, building a case against people powerful enough to corrupt police departments and medical institutions, why would she contact you tonight? Why risk exposing herself? Dr. Torres stumbled slightly, catching herself against a thermal pipe. Unless she's not undercover. Unless she's part of it. Carlos stopped walking entirely. Sarah would never. Carlos. Veronica's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades uncovering uncomfortable truths. I need you to think like the detective you used to be, not the partner who cared about her. What evidence do you actually have that Sarah Kim has been fighting this conspiracy? The silence stretched long enough for them to hear distant voices echoing from the direction they'd come. Their pursuers had found the tunnel entrance. The phone call, Carlos said slowly. She knew details about the insurance fraud investigation. She knew we were in danger, quote, details that someone monitoring communications could have intercepted. Phone calls that could have been orchestrated to guide us toward specific actions. Veronica resumed walking, her pace more urgent now. Carlos, what if Sarah Kim didn't die that night at the precinct? What if she joined them? The possibility hit Carlos like a physical blow. He'd carried guilt about Sarah's death for 2 years, had left the police force because he believed his corruption investigation had gotten his partner killed. If she was alive and working for the very network he'd been trying to expose, why would she do that? He asked. But his voice lacked conviction. Same reason Jake Morrison and his team work for Meridian Insurance Group. Money, threats against family members, or just the pragmatic decision that if you can't beat them, you might as well profit from joining them. Veronica's analysis was coldly practical. How much do you actually know about Sarah's financial situation? Her family circumstances? Her political connections? Dr. Torres was breathing heavily from the exertion, but her medical training kept her focused. We need to assume everyone in law enforcement is potentially compromised. This conspiracy is too large and too successful to exist without official protection. They reached a junction where multiple tunnels branched in different directions. Veronica studied the layout, her mental map of downtown Seattle guiding their choice. This way, toward the courthouse. But as they turned into the new passage, Carlos's phone buzzed with an incoming text. The message was from a blocked number, but its content made his blood run cold. Carlos. It's Sarah. I know you don't trust me, but I'm the only ally you have left. The courthouse is compromised. They're waiting for you there. Meet me at the old precinct building instead. Basement level, evidence storage. I have proof of everything. Das S. He showed the message to Veronica and Dr. Torres. The doctor shook her head immediately. It's a trap. They're hurting us again. But Veronica was studying the message with her investigative mind fully engaged. Carlos, does this sound like how Sarah Kim would write? The phrasing? The tone? Carlos read it again, trying to separate his emotional response from analytical assessment. She always signed her messages Sarah, never just S. And she wouldn't say, I'm the only ally you have left, too dramatic for her personality. Which means whoever's sending these messages doesn't know her well enough to mimic her communication style perfectly. Veronica felt another piece click into place. They're using your emotional connection to manipulate your decisions. The sound of pursuit was getting closer now, multiple sets of footsteps moving through the tunnel system with the systematic approach of people who had maps and knew the layout. So what do we do? Dr. Torres asked. We can't trust law enforcement. We can't trust the people who claim to be helping us, and we're being hunted by professional killers with official backing. Veronica was quiet for a long moment, her mind working through possibilities with the methodical approach that had made her one of the best fraud investigators in the Pacific Northwest. We need to change the game entirely, stop reacting to their moves and start making them react to ours. How? By going public. Not through official channels that can be controlled or corrupted, but through media that can't be suppressed once it's out. She pulled out her phone, checking for signal. Dr. Torres, you mentioned Dr. Jennifer Walsh earlier. What do you actually know about her? She's been documenting similar patient deaths in her practice. Why? Because if she's legitimate, she might be our way to connect with other physicians who are seeing the same patterns. And if she's compromised, we can use her as a way to feed false information back to whoever's coordinating this operation. Carlos was beginning to understand Veronica's approach. You want to set up a counter-operation, use their own tactics against them. Exactly. But first, we need to get somewhere safe, where we can make contact with people outside Seattle. This conspiracy is local, but the evidence suggests it might be part of something larger. She pointed ahead to where faint light was filtering down from above. There's our exit. They climbed a maintenance ladder that led to a utility room beneath the King County Administration Building. Veronica's knowledge of downtown Seattle's infrastructure proved accurate. They were 3 blocks from the courthouse and in a building that closed at 5 p.m., giving them temporary sanctuary. Dr. Torres immediately began checking her encrypted files on a tablet she'd brought from the clinic. Mrs. Brown, I need to show you something. I've been in contact with physicians in Portland, San Francisco, and Phoenix. They're all reporting similar patterns of elderly patient deaths following insurance claim denials. Carlos positioned himself near the room's entrance, listening for any sign that they'd been followed. How widespread is this? Based on preliminary data, it looks like Meridian Insurance Group and their associated companies are operating in at least 12 major cities on the West Coast. Dr. Torres's voice carried the weight of medical professional confronting systematic murder. We're talking about potentially thousands of deaths. Veronica felt the scope of the conspiracy settling over her like a suffocating blanket. This isn't just insurance fraud. It's a coordinated program of genocide against elderly populations, designed to seize their assets and reduce healthcare costs for insurance companies. And it's working, Dr. Torres added grimly. Actuarial reports show significant profit increases for participating insurance companies, while city planning documents show accelerated gentrification in neighborhoods where elderly property owners have died at higher than expected rates. Carlos's phone buzzed again. Another message from the supposed Sarah Kim. Carlos. I saw the news about Dr. Torres's clinic. Are you all safe? I'm coming to get you. Stay where you are. Don't trust anyone else, Max says. But this time Carlos studied the message with detective instincts fully engaged. They don't know where we are. That's why they're trying to get us to reveal our location. Which means we have an advantage, Veronica realized. They're reacting to us now instead of controlling our movements. Dr. Torres looked up from her tablet. I've been thinking about something. If this operation is as large as it appears, there must be whistleblowers, medical professionals, insurance employees, legal staff, someone with a conscience who's documented what's happening. Or someone who's been eliminated for trying to expose it, Carlos pointed out darkly. But Veronica was already pulling up news reports on her own phone. Carlos, what were the circumstances of your partner's supposed death? The official story? Car accident. Single vehicle. Late at night. Skidded off a bridge during a rainstorm. He paused. But Sarah was the best driver I knew, and she'd been acting strange for weeks before it happened, like she was investigating something she couldn't talk about. What if she didn't die in that accident? What if that was staged to remove her from the investigation while making you think she was dead? Veronica's investigative mind was racing ahead. What if the real Sarah Kim is imprisoned somewhere, or hidden, or being used as leverage against someone else? The possibility transformed Carlos's guilt into something far more dangerous, hope mixed with rage. If Sarah was alive, if she'd been held captive for 2 years while he blamed himself for her death, there's only one way to find out, he said grimly. We need to find the real Sarah Kim. Dr. Torres was still working on her tablet when she looked up with an expression of mixed triumph and terror. I found something. Financial records for a company called Geriatric Asset Management. They've been purchasing life insurance policies on elderly people, then coordinating with Meridian Insurance Group to deny medical claims. That's legal? Carlos asked. Buying life insurance on elderly people without their knowledge? Absolutely not. But if they're doing it through shell companies and corrupted medical professionals. Veronica understood the implications immediately. They're not just denying legitimate claims. They're actively betting on people's deaths, and then ensuring those bets pay off. The sound of vehicles arriving outside filtered through the building's ventilation system. Multiple engines, coordinated arrival. Their pursuers had expanded the search. Time to go, Carlos said. But where? Every place we've tried to find help has turned into a trap. Veronica was studying her phone, scrolling through news reports and public records. I have an idea, but it's going to require us to trust someone we've never met, based on nothing but professional reputation and the hope that not everyone in this city is compromised. Who? My granddaughter, Emma Hartwell. She's a journalism student at the University of Washington. If anyone knows how to get information to the public without going through official channels that can be controlled. Quote. Carlos nodded slowly. A college journalist who's not part of the establishment yet. Someone they might not have identified as a threat. Exactly. But first, we need to get to her without leading our hunters directly to another innocent person. Veronica looked at both of her companions. Are you ready to trust a 23-year-old journalism student with evidence that could bring down a conspiracy involving potentially thousands of murders? Dr. Torres closed her tablet and shouldered her medical bag. At this point, Mrs. Brown, I'd trust anyone who isn't actively trying to kill us. Then let's go find my granddaughter, Veronica said. And let's hope she's inherited enough of my investigative instincts to help us stay alive long enough to expose the truth. The University of Washington campus at night felt like a different world from the corporate corridors and underground tunnels where they'd been hunted for the past 6 hours. Students moved between dormitories and late-night study sessions, their concerns focused on midterms and social plans, rather than systematic murder disguised as insurance fraud. Carlos found the normalcy almost surreal after what they'd discovered. Emma Hartwell's apartment was in a converted house near the campus, the kind of place where journalism students survived on ramen and coffee while dreaming of exposing corruption and changing the world. When Veronica knocked on the door, it opened to reveal a young woman whose sharp eyes and analytical expression marked her unmistakably as family. Grandma Vera? Emma's surprise quickly shifted to concern as she took in Veronica's disheveled appearance and the two strangers flanking her. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "Emma, we need to come in. Quickly." Veronica's voice carried urgency, tempered by relief at seeing her granddaughter safe. "And we need your help with something that's going to sound impossible." Emma's apartment reflected her chosen profession, walls covered with investigative charts, newspaper clippings, and photographs connected by red string like a detective's caseboard. Her laptop was surrounded by stacks of journalism textbooks and legal pads covered in notes. This was the workspace of someone who took investigative reporting seriously. "These are Dr. Rebecca Torres and Carlos Vega," Veronica said as Emma locked the door behind them. Dr. Torres is a physician whose elderly patients have been systematically murdered by their insurance company. Carlos is a former police detective whose investigation into corruption got his partner killed. Or at least, we thought she was killed. Emma's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. Her journalism training had taught her to listen to the entire story before asking questions. "Emma, what I'm about to show you is evidence of a conspiracy involving insurance companies, medical professionals, police departments, and legal firms that are working together to murder elderly people and steal their assets." Veronica pulled out her case files, spreading them across Emma's kitchen table. "I need you to help us get this information public before they kill us to keep it quiet." Emma studied the documents with the same methodical attention Veronica had taught her during childhood visits. Financial records, medical charts, death certificates, legal documents, all arranged to tell a story of systematic elimination of vulnerable people for profit. "Grandma Vera, this is—" She paused, her analytical mind processing the scope of what she was seeing. "This isn't just insurance fraud. This is genocide." "That's exactly what it is," Dr. Torres confirmed. "And it's happening in at least 12 cities that we know of. Potentially thousands of deaths over the past 3 years." Carlos was positioned near the window, watching for any sign they'd been followed. "Emma, your grandmother says you might know how to get information to the public without going through channels that can be controlled or corrupted. We've discovered that law enforcement is compromised at multiple levels." Emma was already moving, pulling up secure communication software on her laptop. "I have contacts at the Seattle Times, The Stranger, and several independent media outlets. But for something this big, we need more than just local coverage." Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. "I also have connections to journalism students at other universities who've been investigating similar patterns in their cities. Other students are looking into this?" Veronica felt a surge of hope. "Not exactly this, but related issues. My friend Jake at UC Berkeley has been documenting suspicious deaths in senior living facilities. Sarah at Arizona State is investigating insurance claim denials that seem to target specific demographics. Marcus in Portland is looking into property seizures following deaths of elderly homeowners in gentrifying neighborhoods." Dr. Torres looked up from the medical files she was organizing. "That matches what I found when I started reaching out to colleagues in other cities. The pattern is consistent, but each location focuses on slightly different aspects of asset seizure." Emma's expression grew more determined as she understood the implications. "You're talking about a coordinated national operation. Different cities, different methods, but the same ultimate goal: systematic elimination of elderly people with valuable assets. Which means we need evidence that's strong enough to survive legal challenges and comprehensive enough to show the full scope of the conspiracy," Veronica said. "Emma, what would you need to break a story this big?" Emma was already creating encrypted files and secure communication channels. Multiple independent sources, documented evidence that can be verified, and protection for the people providing information. The last part is the hardest. Once we publish, everyone involved becomes a target. Carlos's phone buzzed again. Another message from the fake Sarah Kim. "Carlos, I'm getting reports that you're at the university. That's not safe. Meet me at our old coffee place on Capitol Hill. I'll explain everything. S." He showed the message to the others. Emma read it and immediately began typing on her laptop. "What was your partner's favorite coffee shop?" She didn't drink coffee. Sarah was always a tea person. Green tea, specifically. Carlos felt another piece of manipulation expose itself. Whoever's sending these messages doesn't know her at all. But they're still tracking us somehow, Dr. Torres observed. How did they know we're at the university? Emma's fingers flew across her keyboard, running diagnostic programs. Cell phone tracking, probably. GPS data, cell tower triangulation, maybe even social media monitoring if any of you have location services enabled. She looked up at them. We need to assume they know where we are at all times unless we take specific countermeasures. What kind of countermeasures? Veronica asked. First, everyone turns off their phones completely. Not just silent, completely powered down. Then we use secure communication tools that route through multiple servers and encrypt everything. Emma was already pulling equipment from various drawers and closets. I have burner phones, encrypted tablets, and access to secure networks through the journalism program. Carlos watched Emma work with growing respect. You've done this before. Journalism students in investigative programs learn operational security early. Too many student reporters have been threatened, harassed, or worse when they get close to important stories. She handed each of them a new device. These are clean phones with encrypted communication apps. No GPS tracking, no connection to your normal identities. Dr. Torres was studying Emma's wall charts with medical professional interest. Emma, what made you choose investigative journalism? My grandmother. Emma smiled at Veronica. She used to tell me stories about her fraud investigations, how she'd follow paper trails and connect patterns that other people missed. I wanted to do the same thing, but for stories that affect entire communities, instead of just insurance companies. Veronica felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Emma had inherited her investigative instincts, but that also meant she understood the dangers they were facing. Emma, once we publish this story, your life changes permanently, she warned. The people we're exposing have killed dozens of people to protect their secret. They won't hesitate to target you. Grandma Vera, they're already targeting you. And Dr. Torres. And Carlos. At least if we go public, we have a chance of stopping them. Emma's resolve was absolute. How many more elderly people will die while we're trying to stay safe? Carlos received another message, but this time it wasn't from the fake Sarah Kim. It was from an unknown number. Stop investigating or your granddaughter dies. You have 24 hours to destroy all evidence and disappear. This is your only warning. The message included a photograph taken through Emma's apartment window 20 minutes earlier, showing all four of them gathered around the kitchen table. They're watching us right now, Carlos said grimly. Emma looked at the photo, and her expression hardened with the kind of determination that Veronica recognized from her own reflection 40 years earlier. Then we better work fast, because I'm not disappearing, and I'm not letting them murder people while we run and hide. She turned to her laptop and began typing furiously. I'm sending everything we have to every journalism contact I trust, with instructions to publish immediately if anything happens to us. If they want to threaten my family, let's see how they handle having their conspiracy exposed to the entire world. Veronica watched her granddaughter transform from college student to professional investigative journalist in real time. Emma, what do you need from us? I need you to tell me everything. Every detail, every connection, every piece of evidence you've found. Because in about 6 hours, I'm going to publish the biggest story of my career. And it's going to destroy the people who think they can murder elderly citizens with impunity. Outside, the sound of vehicles arriving suggested their pursuers had found them once again, but this time, instead of running, they were going to fight back with the most powerful weapon available to them, the truth. Emma's fingers moved across the keyboard, with the focused intensity of someone who understood that speed meant survival. Grandma Vera, I need you to prioritize the evidence. What's the smoking gun that proves systematic murder? Veronica spread the most damning documents across Emma's desk while Carlos monitored the street through carefully positioned mirrors. The actuarial reports cross-referenced with death certificates. They show Meridian Insurance Group's algorithms successfully predicting elderly deaths within specific timeframes, predictions that only work if you're actively causing those deaths. Dr. Torres was uploading encrypted medical files to Emma's secure server. I have 17 patient cases where legitimate medical treatments were denied, appeals were systematically delayed, and patients died exactly when the insurance company's models predicted they would. The vehicles outside had stopped engines, but no one had emerged yet. Carlos recognized the pattern. Surveillance teams confirming target location before tactical teams moved into position. "How long do we have?" Emma asked without looking up from her work. "Maybe 10 minutes before they try to breach the building," Carlos estimated. "But they won't risk a direct assault on a college campus. Too many witnesses, too much media attention." Emma's expression grew grimmer. "Unless they're planning to make it look like something else. Gas leak explosion, electrical fire, anything that would destroy the evidence and eliminate the witnesses simultaneously." The thought hadn't occurred to Carlos, but Emma's assessment made tactical sense. A building accident would be much cleaner than a shootout near a university campus. Veronica was organizing financial documents with practiced efficiency. "Emma, are you getting this information to multiple sources simultaneously? 12 different news outlets, 6 independent journalists, and 3 federal agencies that might have investigators who aren't compromised." Emma's secure communication system showed messages uploading to various encrypted channels. "Plus, I'm live streaming everything to a secure server that automatically publishes if our uploads stop for more than 30 minutes. Dr. Torres looked up from her medical files. "What about protection for the sources? If we expose this conspiracy, everyone who helped gather evidence becomes a target. That's why I'm not just sending the story. I'm sending instructions for protective custody requests and whistleblower protection protocols." Emma had clearly thought through the operational aspects as carefully as the journalistic ones. "My contacts include lawyers who specialize in protecting sources from retaliation." Carlos's phone buzzed with another message, but this time it wasn't from the fake Sarah Kim. The number was blocked, but the content was chillingly direct. "Building is surrounded. You have 5 minutes to come out with all devices and evidence, or we detonate the gas line. This is not negotiable." He showed the message to the others. Emma read it and immediately began typing commands that would accelerate her upload processes. "They're not bluffing," Carlos said. "This building probably does have a gas line they can access, and they've had enough time to position explosives." But Veronica was studying the message with her investigative mind fully engaged. "Carlos, look at the phrasing. We detonate the gas line. That's not how professional operatives communicate. That's how corporate executives who watch too many action movies think operations work." Emma glanced up from her laptop. "You think the message came from someone higher up the chain? Someone giving orders rather than someone trained for field operations? I think Victoria Blackstone or someone at her level is directly involved in tonight's operations." Veronica felt pieces clicking together. "Which means they're making decisions based on panic rather than professional tactical assessment." Dr. Torres was still uploading files, but her medical training was analyzing their situation clinically. "If they're panicking, that suggests our investigation has exposed something more dangerous to them than we realized." Carlos moved to a different window, studying the vehicles outside. 3 black SUVs, professional positioning, but I can see at least 2 people in each vehicle who are clearly not comfortable with whatever they're supposed to be doing here. "Corporate security mixed with professionals," Veronica interpreted. "The real operatives are probably the ones we dealt with earlier. These people are backup called in because the primary team failed to contain us." Emma's upload progress bar showed 85% complete. 4 more minutes and everything goes live simultaneously. "But we still need to get out of here alive to provide additional testimony." The building's fire alarm suddenly began blaring. Not the steady tone of a drill, but the urgent pattern that indicated actual emergency. Through the windows, they could see residents of other apartments beginning to evacuate. "Fire alarm could be legitimate or a forced evacuation," quote, Carlos observed. "Either way, it gives us cover to leave the building." But Emma was shaking her head. "The alarm isn't random timing. They're herding everyone outside so they can identify us in the crowd." She pointed to her laptop screen, which showed security camera feeds from around the campus. "Look at the positioning. They have people with cameras at every exit, taking photos of everyone who comes out. Veronica studied the camera feeds with growing understanding. They're not just trying to capture us, they're trying to identify everyone who might have seen us or helped us. Anyone who becomes a potential witness gets eliminated. The implications were staggering. The conspiracy wasn't just willing to murder elderly people for profit. They were prepared to kill college students and apartment residents to protect their secret. Upload at 92%, Emma announced. But I have an idea for getting us out of here alive. She was typing rapidly, accessing what appeared to be the university's emergency alert system. Within seconds, every student on campus received a message. Active shooter reported near North Campus. Shelter in place. Police responding. Emma, there is no active shooter, Carlos protested. No, but there will be multiple police responses, media attention, and federal investigators once someone starts shooting at a university campus. Her logic was coldly practical. Plus, shelter-in-place orders mean our hunters can't use building evacuations to flush us out. Dr. Torres was watching the street through the window. The people in the vehicles are getting agitated. They're not prepared for this level of public attention. The fire alarm cut off abruptly, replaced by the university's emergency broadcast system. All students and staff shelter in place immediately. Law enforcement is responding to reports of armed individuals on campus. Do not leave buildings until all clear is given. Emma's upload progress hit 100%, just as sirens became audible in the distance. It's done. Everything's published simultaneously across multiple platforms. The story is live. But Carlos was watching the SUVs outside with growing concern. Instead of retreating, the occupants were emerging with what appeared to be tactical equipment. They're not backing down, he reported. Looks like they've decided the risk of exposure is worth taking if they can eliminate us before we can provide additional testimony. Veronica moved to join him at the window, studying their adversaries with 40 years of investigative experience. Carlos, those aren't the same people who've been hunting us all night. Different vehicles, different body language, different equipment. What do you mean? I mean, the professionals who were tracking us earlier would have retreated the moment this became a public incident. These people are amateurs who've been called in as backup. She pointed to how they were handling their weapons and moving around the vehicles. They're scared, which makes them more dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. Emma was monitoring news feeds on multiple screens, watching her story spread across social media and news outlets. It's working. Local news is picking up the story, federal agencies are opening investigations, and other journalists are confirming the patterns in their cities. Dr. Torres suddenly grabbed Veronica's arm. Look at the medical examiner's van. Through the window, they could see a vehicle marked King County Medical Examiner parking behind the SUVs. But instead of responding to an emergency, it appeared to be coordinating with the people who had been hunting them. The medical examiner's office is compromised. Carlos realized. They're here to provide official cover for whatever happens next. Emma's expression grew determined as she understood the implications. They're planning to kill us and rule it accidental deaths or justified shootings. But they can't do that now. Too many people are watching. The university's emergency response had created a protective bubble around them, but it also trapped them in a building surrounded by people willing to commit murder to protect their conspiracy. We need to get to the police who are responding to the active shooter report, Carlos said. Real police, not the ones who are part of this network. But Veronica was studying the situation with the analytical mind that had made her one of the best fraud investigators in the Pacific Northwest. Carlos, what if we don't run this time? What if we make them come to us, but on our terms? Emma looked up from her laptops where she was now live streaming their situation. What do you mean, Grandma Vera? I mean, we turn this apartment into a crime scene so well documented that they can't cover it up, no matter how many people they have in official positions. Veronica's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had just realized how to win a game everyone else thought was unwinnable. We're going to give them exactly what they want, a direct confrontation. But we're going to make sure the entire world is watching when we do it. The building's lights cut out at exactly 11:47 p.m., plunging Emma's apartment into darkness, illuminated only by the glow of laptop screens and the street lights filtering through windows. But the power outage revealed something that made Carlos's blood run cold. Laser sights were now visible through the windows, painting red dots across the walls and furniture. "Sniper positions," he announced quietly, pulling everyone away from the windows. "Professional setup. They're not planning to take us alive." Emma's equipment was running on battery backup, her live stream still broadcasting to an audience that had grown to over 500,000 viewers. The comments were now a mixture of real-time tactical advice from military veterans, legal guidance from attorneys, and emotional support from families who had lost elderly relatives under suspicious circumstances. "The power outage is intentional," Emma reported, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "They want to disable our communication equipment and force us to rely on emergency lighting that will make us visible targets." Dr. Torres was crouched behind her medical equipment, but her physician's training kept her focused on practical concerns. If they're using sniper positions, they want this to look like a law enforcement operation. Clean shots, minimal damage to surrounding property. Official reports claiming we were armed and dangerous. Veronica studied the laser patterns moving across the room, with the analytical mind that had made her Seattle's most successful fraud investigator. Those positions aren't random. They're coordinated to provide overlapping fields of fire with no escape routes. Military-level tactical planning. Carlos's secure phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed Detective Sarah Kim, but this time Emma's trace programs immediately identified multiple red flags. "Don't answer it," Emma warned. "The call is being routed through cell towers that aren't supposed to be active in this area. Someone's using portable equipment to mimic legitimate communications." But the phone kept ringing, and through the building's compromised PA system, they could hear a voice that sounded exactly like Sarah Kim. "Carlos, I know you can hear me. I'm in the building with federal agents. We have arrest warrants for the people who have been hunting you, but I need you to identify your location so we can provide protection." Carlos stared at his phone, torn between hope and tactical awareness. That's her voice. Exactly her speech patterns, her tone, everything. "Voice synthesis technology," Emma explained. "They've had hours to analyze recorded conversations and create artificial reproductions. It's the same technique used for deepfake videos but applied to audio." Dr. Torres was monitoring medical emergency frequencies when she picked up something that made her expression grow grim. Multiple ambulances are being positioned around the building. Not for emergency response, for body removal. They're preparing for casualties. The PA system activated again, but this time the voice was different. "Mrs. Brown, this is Victoria Blackstone, CEO of Meridian Insurance Group. I think it's time we spoke directly." Veronica felt a cold certainty settle over her. After hours of being hunted by proxies and operatives, she was finally hearing from the person who had ordered her death. "I know you're listening, Mrs. Brown. Your investigation has been thorough. More thorough than we anticipated. But you've also made several critical errors in your analysis." Emma was recording everything while simultaneously broadcasting it live. Victoria Blackstone's voice was now being heard by over 500,000 people worldwide, creating permanent evidence of her direct involvement. "You see, Mrs. Brown, what you call murder, we call market correction. The healthcare system is unsustainable when resources are wasted on people who no longer contribute to economic productivity. We've simply developed more efficient allocation methods." Dr. Torres's medical training recoiled at the clinical description of systematic murder. She's talking about human beings like their economic statistics. That's exactly how she sees elderly people, Veronica realized. Not as patients or citizens, but as inefficient resource allocation that needs to be corrected. Victoria's voice continued through the PA system. "The beautiful thing about our system, Mrs. Brown, is that it's completely legal. Insurance companies have always had the right to deny claims that don't meet their actuarial standards. We've simply made those standards more precise." Carlos was studying the sniper positions through Emma's security cameras. "She's stalling, keeping us talking while her people finalize their positions. Our algorithms can predict with remarkable accuracy which elderly patients will die within specific timeframes. The only variable we control is whether their medical treatments are approved or delayed. We're not killing anyone, Mrs. Brown. We're simply allowing natural selection to proceed more efficiently. Emma's livestream comments were exploding with outrage from viewers around the world, but she noticed something else. Law enforcement agencies were now publicly commenting, identifying themselves and calling for immediate federal intervention. "Look at this," Emma showed them her screen. FBI field offices in 12 cities are publicly stating they're opening investigations. Federal prosecutors are requesting emergency jurisdiction. Someone at the Justice Department is watching this live stream and taking action in real time. But Victoria Blackstone's voice was growing more confident. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Brown, your investigation has created complications. The public doesn't understand the economic necessities involved in modern healthcare policy. Your emotional appeals about individual cases are interfering with rational resource allocation." Veronica moved to where she could speak toward the PA system's pickup microphones. "Victoria, I want you to explain something to the 500,000 people who are listening. How does murdering Harold Martinez save healthcare costs when his family is now suing your company for wrongful death?" Brief silence. Then, "Mr. Martinez died of natural causes after his insurance claim was properly evaluated according to established actuarial standards. Harold Martinez died of lung cancer after your company delayed his treatment approval for 14 weeks, while you conducted additional reviews that your own internal emails show were designed to ensure he died before treatment could begin." Dr. Torres joined the conversation. "Victoria, this is Dr. Rebecca Torres. I treated 17 patients whose deaths your algorithm successfully predicted. How did your computers know they would die unless you were actively causing those deaths?" Another pause. "Dr. Torres, you were terminated from our provider network for submitting fraudulent claims and inappropriate treatment recommendations for patients whose conditions didn't justify the requested interventions. I was terminated because I documented that your company was systematically denying legitimate treatments for elderly patients and then collecting life insurance payouts when they died as a result." Emma was monitoring multiple news feeds while maintaining the live stream. Every major network is now covering this. Federal agencies are publicly announcing investigations. Victoria Blackstone's stock holdings are crashing in after-hours trading. But Victoria's response revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. "Dr. Torres, what you call systematic denial, we call evidence-based medicine. Our clinical review panels include physicians, economists, and public policy experts who understand that healthcare resources must be allocated based on societal benefit, not individual emotional appeals." Carlos understood the implication immediately. She's not just talking about insurance fraud. She's describing a systematic program of medical rationing based on social utility calculations. "That's eugenics," Veronica said flatly. "Systematic elimination of populations deemed economically unproductive." "Mrs. Brown, that's an inflammatory characterization of rational healthcare policy. Our actuarial models simply recognize that certain populations require disproportionate medical resources relative to their remaining economic contributions." Emma's voice carried steel as she spoke directly to the microphones. "Victoria Blackstone, you're describing the systematic murder of elderly people for profit, while 500,000 people are listening live. How exactly do you expect to survive this politically or legally?" For the first time, Victoria's confidence wavered slightly. "Miss Hartwell, I think you'll find that public opinion is more malleable than you realize. Healthcare policy is complex, and people ultimately support measures that reduce their insurance premiums and tax burdens." But Emma was watching her screens with growing excitement. "Victoria, you might want to check the news. Your company's board of directors just issued a statement dissociating themselves from your comments and announcing your immediate suspension pending investigation." The PA system went silent for nearly a full minute. When Victoria's voice returned, it carried a different tone entirely. "It doesn't matter what happens to me personally. The program is operational in 43 cities across 18 states. Thousands of people are involved in implementation. You can't stop systematic healthcare reform by exposing one administrator. Dr. Torres felt the scope of the conspiracy settling over them like a suffocating weight. 43 cities. She's describing industrial-scale elimination of elderly populations across the entire country. Carlos was monitoring law enforcement communications when he picked up something that changed their tactical situation entirely. Multiple federal agencies are now coordinating a joint response: FBI, DEA, ATF, and federal marshals. This has escalated to federal jurisdiction. Emma's live stream was now being carried by every major news network, with federal officials publicly commenting and promising immediate action. But the red laser dots were still moving across the apartment, indicating that the immediate tactical threat remained unchanged. Victoria, Veronica spoke clearly toward the microphones. I have one more question for you. How many people have you murdered? Mrs. Brown, I haven't murdered anyone. I've implemented actuarial policies that optimize healthcare resource allocation for maximum societal benefit. How many elderly people have died because you deliberately delayed or denied their medical treatments? Long pause. Mrs. Brown, actuarial science indicates that our policies have prevented the waste of approximately $47 million in healthcare expenditures that would have been spent on patients with negative expected outcomes. Dr. Torres translated the euphemism with medical precision. She's saying they've killed enough people to save $47 million in medical costs. Emma was calculating rapidly. Average healthcare costs for elderly patients with serious conditions. Victoria, you're describing the deaths of several thousand people. Ms. Hartwell, you're applying emotional characterizations to rational policy implementation. But Carlos was watching his secure communication equipment when he received a message that changed everything. This is FBI, sack Jennifer Walsh. We have federal arrest warrants and are prepared to take the building. Are you able to identify safe evacuation routes? Emma ran the message through her verification systems and found legitimate federal authorization codes. It's real. Actual FBI with actual arrest warrants. Victoria Blackstone's voice came through the PA system one final time, but now it carried the tone of someone who realized they had lost. Mrs. Brown, you've won this particular engagement, but the program will continue. Too many people benefit from efficient healthcare resource allocation for it to be stopped by emotional appeals about individual cases. The laser sights disappeared from the apartment windows, replaced by the coordinated movement of federal agents in tactical gear. Through Emma's security cameras, they could see the people who had been hunting them for hours being arrested by FBI agents and federal marshals. Emma's livestream showed federal agents entering the building while news helicopters circled overhead and crowds of protesters gathered in support of the investigation. The story had evolved from a local insurance fraud case to a national scandal involving systematic murder disguised as healthcare policy. But as they prepared to be evacuated by federal protection, Veronica realized that Victoria Blackstone's final words carried a chilling truth. The program was too large and too profitable to be stopped by exposing one administrator or one company. Carlos, she said as they heard FBI agents approaching their floor, I think we've won this battle. But I'm afraid we've also discovered that the war is much bigger than we ever imagined. Dr. Torres was gathering her medical evidence while Emma continued broadcasting their rescue. At least now we know what we're fighting. And we know there are people willing to fight it. Emma looked at her grandmother with pride and determination. Grandma Vera, this isn't the end of the story. This is just the beginning of the investigation that's going to expose systematic murder disguised as healthcare policy in dozens of cities. As federal agents secured the building and began the process of taking them into protective custody, Veronica felt the satisfaction of a fraud investigator who had successfully exposed a complex conspiracy. But she also felt the weight of knowing that they had uncovered something far more horrifying than simple insurance fraud. They had exposed systematic genocide disguised as economic efficiency, and their survival meant they now had the responsibility to ensure that every person involved in the murders of thousands of elderly Americans would face justice. The confrontation was over, but their work as investigators had just begun. Grandma Vera, we're all going to survive this. Because now we know exactly how big this conspiracy is. And that means we know exactly how many people they've made enemies of by murdering their loved ones. The building's lights cut out at exactly 11:47 p.m., plunging Emma's apartment into darkness, illuminated only by the glow of laptop screens and the streetlights filtering through windows. But the power outage revealed something that made Carlos's blood run cold. Laser sights were now visible through the windows, painting red dots across the walls and furniture. "Sniper positions," he announced quietly, pulling everyone away from the windows. "Professional setup. They're not planning to take us alive." Emma's equipment was running on battery backup, her live stream still broadcasting to an audience that had grown to over 500,000 viewers. The comments were now a mixture of real-time tactical advice from military veterans, legal guidance from attorneys, and emotional support from families who had lost elderly relatives under suspicious circumstances. "The power outage is intentional," Emma reported, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "They want to disable our communication equipment and force us to rely on emergency lighting that will make us visible targets." Dr. Torres was crouched behind her medical equipment, but her physician's training kept her focused on practical concerns. If they're using sniper positions, they want this to look like a law enforcement operation. Clean shots, minimal damage to surrounding property, official reports claiming we were armed and dangerous. Veronica studied the laser patterns moving across the room with the analytical mind that had made her Seattle's most successful fraud investigator. Those positions aren't random. They're coordinated to provide overlapping fields of fire with no escape routes. Military-level tactical planning. Carlos's secure phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed Detective Sarah Kim, but this time Emma's trace programs immediately identified multiple red flags. "Don't answer it," Emma warned. "The call is being routed through cell towers that aren't supposed to be active in this area. Someone's using portable equipment to mimic legitimate communications." But the phone kept ringing, and through the building's compromised PA system, they could hear a voice that sounded exactly like Sarah Kim. "Carlos, I know you can hear me. I'm in the building with federal agents. We have arrest warrants for the people who have been hunting you. But I need you to identify your location so we can provide protection." Carlos stared at his phone, torn between hope and tactical awareness. That's her voice. Exactly her speech patterns, her tone, everything. "Voice synthesis technology," Emma explained. "They've had hours to analyze recorded conversations and create artificial reproductions. It's the same technique used for deepfake videos, but applied to audio." Dr. Torres was monitoring medical emergency frequencies when she picked up something that made her expression grow grim. Multiple ambulances are being positioned around the building, not for emergency response, for body removal. They're preparing for casualties. The PA system activated again, but this time the voice was different. "Mrs. Brown, this is Victoria Blackstone, CEO of Meridian Insurance Group. I think it's time we spoke directly." Veronica felt a cold certainty settle over her. After hours of being hunted by proxies and operatives, she was finally hearing from the person who had ordered her death. "I know you're listening, Mrs. Brown. Your investigation has been thorough. More thorough than we anticipated. But you've also made several critical errors in your analysis." Emma was recording everything while simultaneously broadcasting it live. Victoria Blackstone's voice was now being heard by over 500,000 people worldwide, creating permanent evidence of her direct involvement. "You see, Mrs. Brown, what you call murder, we call market correction. The healthcare system is unsustainable when resources are wasted on people who no longer contribute to economic productivity. We've simply developed more efficient allocation methods." Dr. Torres's medical training recoiled at the clinical description of systematic murder. "She's talking about human beings like they're economic statistics." That's exactly how she sees elderly people, Veronica realized. Not as patients or citizens, but as inefficient resource allocation that needs to be corrected. Victoria's voice continued through the PA system. "The beautiful thing about our system, Mrs. Brown, is that it's completely legal. Insurance companies have always had the right to deny claims that don't meet their actuarial standards. We've simply made those standards more precise." Carlos was studying the sniper positions through Emma's security cameras. She's stalling, keeping us talking while her people finalize their positions. Our algorithms can predict with remarkable accuracy which elderly patients will die within specific timeframes. The only variable we control is whether their medical treatments are approved or delayed. We're not killing anyone, Mrs. Brown. We're simply allowing natural selection to proceed more efficiently. Emma's livestream comments were exploding with outrage from viewers around the world. But she noticed something else. Law enforcement agencies were now publicly commenting, identifying themselves, and calling for immediate federal intervention. Look at this. Emma showed them her screen. FBI field offices in 12 cities are publicly stating they're opening investigations. Federal prosecutors are requesting emergency jurisdiction. Someone at the Justice Department is watching this live stream and taking action in real time. But Victoria Blackstone's voice was growing more confident. Unfortunately, Mrs. Brown, your investigation has created complications. The public doesn't understand the economic necessities involved in modern healthcare policy. Your emotional appeals about individual cases are interfering with rational resource allocation. Veronica moved to where she could speak toward the PA system's pickup microphones. Victoria, I want you to explain something to the 500,000 people who are listening. How does murdering Harold Martinez save healthcare costs when his family is now suing your company for wrongful death? Brief silence. Then, Mr. Martinez died of natural causes after his insurance claim was properly evaluated according to established actuarial standards. Harold Martinez died of lung cancer after your company delayed his treatment approval for 14 weeks while you conducted additional reviews that your own internal emails show were designed to ensure he died before treatment could begin. Dr. Torres joined the conversation. Victoria, this is Dr. Rebecca Torres. I treated 17 patients whose deaths your algorithm successfully predicted. How did your computers know they would die unless you were actively causing those deaths? Another pause. Dr. Torres, you are terminated from our provider network for submitting fraudulent claims and inappropriate treatment recommendations for patients whose conditions didn't justify the requested interventions. I was terminated because I documented that your company was systematically denying legitimate treatments for elderly patients and then collecting life insurance payouts when they died as a result. Emma was monitoring multiple news feeds while maintaining the live stream. Every major network is now covering this. Federal agencies are publicly announcing investigations. Victoria Blackstone's stock holdings are crashing in after-hours trading. But Victoria's response revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Dr. Torres, what you call systematic denial, we call evidence-based medicine. Our clinical review panels include physicians, economists, and public policy experts who understand that healthcare resources must be allocated based on societal benefit, not individual emotional appeals. Carlos understood the implication immediately. She's not just talking about insurance fraud, she's describing a systematic program of medical rationing based on social utility calculations. Quote, "That's eugenics," Veronica said flatly. "Systematic elimination of populations deemed economically unproductive." Mrs. Brown, that's an inflammatory characterization of rational healthcare policy. Our actuarial models simply recognize that certain populations require disproportionate medical resources relative to their remaining economic contributions. Emma's voice carried steel as she spoke directly to the microphones. Victoria Blackstone, you're describing the systematic murder of elderly people for profit while 500,000 people are listening live. How exactly do you expect to survive this, politically or legally? For the first time, Victoria's confidence wavered slightly. Miss Hartwell, I think you'll find that public opinion is more malleable than you realize. Healthcare policy is complex, and people ultimately support measures that reduce their insurance premiums and tax burdens. But Emma was watching her screens with growing excitement. Victoria, you might want to check the news. Your company's board of directors just issued a statement dissociating themselves from your comments and announcing your immediate suspension pending investigation. The PA system went silent for nearly a full minute. When Victoria's voice returned, it carried a different tone entirely. It doesn't matter what happens to me personally. The program is operational in 43 cities across 18 states. Thousands of people are involved in implementation. You can't stop systematic healthcare reform by exposing one administrator. Dr. Torres felt the scope of the conspiracy settling over them like a suffocating weight. 43 cities. She's describing industrial-scale elimination of elderly populations across the entire country. Carlos was monitoring law enforcement communications when he picked up something that changed their tactical situation entirely. Multiple federal agencies are now coordinating a joint response. FBI, DEA, ATF, and federal marshals. This has escalated to federal jurisdiction. Emma's live stream was now being carried by every major news network, with federal officials publicly commenting and promising immediate action. But the red laser dots were still moving across the apartment, indicating that the immediate tactical threat remained unchanged. Victoria. Veronica spoke clearly toward the microphones. I have one more question for you. How many people have you murdered? Mrs. Brown, I haven't murdered anyone. I've implemented actuarial policies that optimize healthcare resource allocation for maximum societal benefit. How many elderly people have died because you deliberately delayed or denied their medical treatments? Long pause. Mrs. Brown, actuarial science indicates that our policies have prevented the waste of approximately $47 million in healthcare expenditures that would have been spent on patients with negative expected outcomes. Dr. Torres translated the euphemism with medical precision. She's saying they've killed enough people to save $47 million in medical costs. Emma was calculating rapidly. Average healthcare costs for elderly patients with serious conditions. Victoria, you're describing the deaths of several thousand people. Miss Hartwell, you're applying emotional characterizations to rational policy implementation. But Carlos was watching his secure communication equipment when he received a message that changed everything. This is FBI SAC Jennifer Walsh. We have federal arrest warrants and are prepared to take the building. Are you able to identify safe evacuation routes? Emma ran the message through her verification systems and found legitimate federal authorization codes. It's real. Actual FBI with actual arrest warrants. Victoria Blackstone's voice came through the PA system one final time, but now it carried the tone of someone who realized they had lost. Mrs. Brown, you've won this particular engagement, but the program will continue. Too many people benefit from efficient healthcare resource allocation for it to be stopped by emotional appeals about individual cases. The laser sights disappeared from the apartment windows, replaced by the coordinated movement of federal agents in tactical gear. Through Emma's security cameras, they could see the people who had been hunting them for hours being arrested by FBI agents and federal marshals. Emma's live stream showed federal agents entering the building, while news helicopters circled overhead and crowds of protesters gathered in support of the investigation. The story had evolved from a local insurance fraud case to a national scandal involving systematic murder disguised as healthcare policy. But as they prepared to be evacuated by federal protection, Veronica realized that Victoria Blackstone's final words carried a chilling truth. The program was too large and too profitable to be stopped by exposing one administrator or one company. Carlos, she said as they heard FBI agents approaching their floor, I think we've won this battle, but I'm afraid we've also discovered that the war is much bigger than we ever imagined. Dr. Torres was gathering her medical evidence while Emma continued broadcasting their rescue. At least now we know what we're fighting, and we know there are people willing to fight it. Emma looked at her grandmother with pride and determination. Grandma Vera, this isn't the end of the story. This is just the beginning of the investigation that's going to expose systematic murder disguised as healthcare policy in dozens of cities. As federal agents secured the building and began the process of taking them into protective custody, Veronica felt the satisfaction of a fraud investigator who had successfully exposed a complex conspiracy. But she also felt the weight of knowing that they had uncovered something far more horrifying than simple insurance fraud. They had exposed systematic genocide disguised as economic efficiency, and their survival meant they now had the responsibility to ensure that every person involved in the murders of thousands of elderly Americans would face justice. The confrontation was over, but their work as investigators had just begun. Part 10. New Beginnings. 6 months later, Veronica Brown stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office in downtown Seattle, watching the morning commuters stream past the federal courthouse, where Victoria Blackstone's trial was entering its final week. The view encompassed the same medical building where her journey had started, but everything about her perspective had changed fundamentally. The brass nameplate on her desk read, Brown Hartwell Investigative Services, reflecting the partnership that had emerged from their harrowing night of survival. Emma had deferred her final semester at the University of Washington to work full-time on what had become the largest insurance fraud investigation in American history. Grandma Vera, the Phoenix team, found another cluster. Emma called from her workstation, which occupied half of their shared office space. Her setup resembled a newsroom command center, multiple monitors displaying case-tracking databases, secure communication channels with sources across the country, and real-time feeds from ongoing federal investigations. Dr. Rebecca Torres entered their office carrying coffee and the grim expression that had become standard for their weekly briefings. She'd relocated her medical practice to serve as a consultant for their investigation, while maintaining her patient care responsibilities. How many this time? Veronica asked, settling at the conference table they'd installed for these sessions. 17 elderly patients, all with assets exceeding $500,000, all died within predicted timeframes after insurance claims were denied or delayed. Emma's voice carried the professional neutrality she'd developed while documenting systematic murder. Same algorithmic patterns we've identified in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Denver. Carlos Vega joined them, carrying files from his morning meeting with federal prosecutors. His transition back to law enforcement had been complicated. He now worked as a federal consultant on elder abuse cases, his experience with the Meridian conspiracy making him invaluable to investigators across multiple states. Federal grand jury in Los Angeles issued 43 additional indictments yesterday, quote, he reported, including 2 sitting judges who were approving property seizures after suspicious elderly deaths. Dr. Torres opened her laptop to display medical data that still made her visibly upset despite months of exposure. The scope keeps expanding. Medical practices in 31 cities have now been identified as participants in systematic claim denial networks. We're looking at potentially 8,000 elderly deaths over the past 5 years. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. 8,000 people, grandparents, parents, community elders, eliminated through a bureaucratic process designed to appear as natural healthcare outcomes. Emma was monitoring news feeds while tracking the various federal investigations their evidence had triggered. Victoria Blackstone's trial is getting daily national coverage, but the broader story is being treated like separate local scandals rather than a coordinated national program. Media fragmentation, Veronica observed. Same technique used to minimize other systematic problems. Cover individual cases intensively while avoiding analysis of the overall pattern. Carlos had been working closely with FBI field offices as they uncovered the network's organizational structure. The federal investigation has identified what they're calling actuarial solutions networks, operating in 43 cities. Each network appears independent, but they're all using identical algorithms, legal frameworks, and operational procedures. Franchised systematic murder, Dr. Torres said grimly. Like a fast food chain, but for eliminating elderly people. Emma pulled up a complex organizational chart she'd been developing through her journalism contacts and federal sources. Look at the corporate connections. Meridian Insurance Group was just one company in a network of over 200 firms. Insurance companies, medical practices, legal firms, property management companies, and investment groups. The chart revealed a web of financial relationships that transformed elderly deaths into profit streams across multiple industries. Insurance companies saved money on claim payouts, medical practices reduced expensive patient loads, legal firms collected fees from property transfers, and investment groups acquired valuable real estate at below-market prices. It's brilliant in the most horrifying possible way, Veronica admitted. They created a system where everyone profits from elderly deaths except the elderly people themselves. Carlos's secure phone buzzed with a message from FBI SAC Jennifer Walsh, who had become their primary federal contact. She wants to meet, says they found something that changes our understanding of the network's origins. 20 minutes later, they were seated in a secure conference room at the FBI's Seattle field office. where Sack Walsh was joined by federal prosecutors and analysts from the Justice Department's Elder Justice Initiative. What we're about to show you is classified, but given your role in exposing this network, you need to understand what we're really dealing with, Sack Walsh began. She activated a large display showing financial records and corporate documents. The actuarial solutions networks weren't created by insurance companies or medical practices. They were designed by a consulting firm called Demographic Transition Associates, which has contracts with state governments, federal agencies, and private corporations across multiple industries. Emma's journalism instincts immediately focused on the implications. You're saying this was planned at the federal level? Not exactly planned, but certainly enabled. DTA was hired to develop cost-effective healthcare resource allocation models for aging populations. Their recommendations were implemented through state insurance regulations, Medicare policy changes, and private insurance company procedures. Dr. Torres felt the scope of the conspiracy expanding beyond what she'd thought possible. They weren't just murdering people for profit. They were implementing government policy designed to reduce healthcare costs by eliminating expensive patients. Sack Walsh displayed additional documents showing the network's true scope. DTA has similar programs in development for disabled populations, chronic mental health patients, and what they call economically non-productive demographics. Veronica felt the investigative clarity that had defined her career, but now applied to something that dwarfed any fraud case she'd previously encountered. This isn't healthcare fraud. This is systematic elimination of populations deemed economically burdensome, implemented through official policy channels and private industry cooperation. Carlos was studying the organizational charts with his law enforcement background. How many people are we talking about? Based on preliminary analysis, potentially 50,000 deaths nationwide over the past 5 years. But the program was designed to scale up significantly as the population ages and healthcare costs increase. The number was so large it seemed abstract, but Emma's journalism training helped her translate it into human terms. 50,000 families who lost grandparents, parents, spouses. Entire communities where elderly people died at rates that seemed natural but were actually algorithmic predictions being fulfilled through systematic medical neglect. Sack Walsh continued with information that made their previous discoveries seem limited in scope. The legal framework supporting these networks includes federal legislation, state regulations, and court precedents that were specifically designed to make this type of resource allocation legally defensible. Which means prosecuting the networks requires challenging the legal foundation that made their operations possible, Veronica realized. We're not just fighting corporate criminals. We're fighting systematic policy implementation at multiple levels of government. Dr. Torres was reading through medical protocols that had been distributed to healthcare providers nationwide. These documents show that physicians were trained to identify inappropriate resource utilization among elderly patients and report them for actuarial review. We were being taught to participate in systematic elimination without realizing what we were doing. Emma found herself facing the story that would define her career as an investigative journalist. This is the biggest systematic murder program in American history, implemented through healthcare policy and disguised as economic efficiency. But Sack Walsh's expression suggested there were additional complications they hadn't yet understood. There's more. The networks we've identified are operational models being exported internationally. Similar programs are being implemented in 12 countries, all using DTA consulting services and American-developed algorithms. Carlos felt the weight of their discovery settling over him like a suffocating blanket. We're talking about international systematic elimination of elderly populations, coordinated through American consulting firms and implemented by local collaborators. Which means the people we've exposed represent just the American implementation of a global program, Veronica concluded. Victoria Blackstone and the Meridian Network were middle management in a much larger operation. Emma was already thinking about how to investigate and expose something of this scope. We need international journalism partnerships, coordination with investigators in other countries, legal challenges that address the policy frameworks, not just the individual criminal cases. Sack Walsh provided them with secure access to federal databases containing evidence from ongoing investigations worldwide. The Justice Department is prepared to support your continued investigation, but you need to understand that you're now dealing with opponents who have resources and political connections at the highest levels of multiple governments. Dr. Torres was studying international medical data showing suspicious elderly mortality patterns in countries across Europe, Asia, and South America. The medical evidence is consistent with what we found in American cities. Algorithmic prediction models being fulfilled through systematic denial of medical care. Carlos realized their survival 6 months earlier had been just the beginning of a much larger battle. We're not just investigating corporate crime anymore. We're investigating systematic policy implementation designed to eliminate populations deemed economically burdensome. But Emma's expression showed the determination that had helped them survive their initial encounter with the conspiracy. Then we keep investigating. We expose every connection, every policy, every person involved in systematic murder disguised as healthcare efficiency. Veronica looked at her granddaughter, her former police detective partner, and the physician who had risked everything to expose medical murder, and felt the same analytical clarity that had guided her through 40 years of fraud investigation. Emma's right. We've uncovered systematic elimination of elderly populations implemented through official policy channels and private industry cooperation. That means we have a responsibility to expose everyone involved, regardless of their political connections or official positions. SAC Walsh provided them with additional security protocols and federal protection arrangements. The people you're investigating now have the resources to eliminate witnesses on an international scale. You'll need to be more careful than you were during your initial exposure of the Meridian network. Dr. Torres was already planning how to coordinate with medical professionals worldwide who might be witnessing similar patterns in their patient populations. If this is happening internationally, there must be physicians in other countries who have noticed suspicious mortality patterns among their elderly patients. Carlos understood that their work would now require coordination with law enforcement agencies across multiple countries, many of which might be compromised by the same networks they were investigating. We'll need to verify which international law enforcement agencies are trustworthy, and which might be protecting these networks. Emma was setting up secure international communication channels and researching investigative journalism partnerships in countries where DTA was operating. I'll need to connect with journalists who have been investigating similar patterns in their countries, even if they didn't understand the international coordination. As they prepared to leave the FBI field office with access to classified information about international systematic elimination networks, Veronica realized that their investigation had evolved from insurance fraud case to the exposure of global systematic murder disguised as healthcare policy. 6 months ago, I was a retired insurance investigator concerned about suspicious claim denials, she reflected. Now we're investigating international systematic elimination of elderly populations implemented through government policy and private industry cooperation. Emma looked at her grandmother with the respect and determination that had sustained them through their initial encounter with systematic murder. Grandma Vera, you taught me that the most important investigations are the ones that expose systematic harm to vulnerable people. This is the investigation of our lifetimes. Dr. Torres gathered her medical evidence files, now expanded to include international data showing consistent patterns of suspicious elderly deaths across multiple countries. We have the evidence, we have federal support, and we have international connections. Most importantly, we have the responsibility to ensure that no more elderly people die, because algorithms determine they're economically expendable. Carlos prepared to coordinate with international law enforcement agencies while maintaining security protocols designed to protect them from opponents with governmental resources. We survived exposure of the American networks. Now we need to survive exposure of the International Systematic Elimination Program. As they left the federal building to return to their investigative firm, Veronica felt the satisfaction of someone whose life's work had evolved into something far more important than she'd ever imagined possible. She was no longer just a fraud investigator. She was part of a team exposing systematic genocide disguised as healthcare efficiency. Emma walked beside her grandmother, already planning articles and investigations that would expose international systematic elimination networks to worldwide attention. This story is going to change how people think about healthcare policy, aging populations, and the protection of vulnerable people everywhere. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across downtown Seattle as they returned to their office to continue the investigation that had begun with a whispered warning in an Uber and had evolved into the exposure of international systematic murder implemented through official policy channels. Their work was far from over, but they had proven that systematic elimination of vulnerable populations could be exposed and stopped when investigators were willing to follow evidence wherever it led, regardless of how powerful the perpetrators might be. Veronica Brown, investigative fraud specialist, had found her true purpose in the final chapter of her career. And with her granddaughter, a dedicated physician, and a determined former detective as partners, she was prepared to continue the fight for justice that would define the rest of her life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,